The little girl had never run toward anyone in her life, because she had never been able to see where she was going. Yet that bright spring afternoon, in the middle of a crowded charity garden, 7-year-old Maisie Whitmore suddenly tore away from her mother, ran straight across the stone path with her white cane dragging behind her, and threw both arms around a complete stranger. The billionaire mother watching from only a few yards away froze in disbelief, because her blind daughter had spent years refusing to let anyone outside the family touch her. The stranger was a quiet single father named Everett Callahan, a maintenance worker hired to help prepare the estate grounds for the charity event. What no one knew was that Everett had once been a Navy SEAL, and the man who had survived missions that never appeared in newspapers had spent years hiding from the memories that followed him home. If you believe in kindness, forgiveness, hope, and second chances, please take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps our family bring more emotional stories of courage, compassion, and hope to our community. Maisie Whitmore had been born into a world most people could only imagine. Her mother, Celeste Whitmore, owned one of the largest luxury technology companies in the country, lived in a magnificent estate outside Boston, and could solve a business crisis with a single phone call. But none of her wealth had been able to solve the problem that mattered most to her. Maisie had lost her sight after a rare childhood illness, and although doctors had assured Celeste that her daughter could live a full and independent life, the little girl had slowly become frightened of the world around her. She hated unfamiliar rooms, unexpected footsteps, crowded places, and especially strangers. Her blindness had never made her weak, but the fear surrounding it had made her cautious. Celeste had hired therapists, teachers, specialists, guides, and caregivers, yet most of them eventually left because Maisie refused to trust them. Every new person seemed to remind her that she could not see what was coming. Celeste tried to compensate with protection. She built soft boundaries around her daughter so carefully that she barely realized those boundaries had become walls. Maisie had private tutors, a specially trained guide dog, expensive equipment, and every opportunity money could provide, but what she wanted most was something money could not purchase, the confidence that someone would stay when things became difficult. That afternoon, the Whitmore estate was hosting a charity gathering for children with disabilities. The garden had been decorated with white tents, flowers, music, food tables, and colorful ribbons. Celeste had arranged everything personally, hoping Maisie would enjoy the event. Instead, the noise overwhelmed her. She stood beside her mother gripping her cane while adults moved around her and unfamiliar voices echoed from every direction. Then a metal stand near the fountain suddenly tipped over. The crash was not dangerous, but it was loud enough to make Maisie panic. She pulled her hand away from her mother's and stumbled backward. Celeste immediately reached for her, but someone moved between them. Everett Callahan had been carrying a wooden crate across the garden when he heard the crash. He dropped the crate before it struck the ground, moved toward the child, and lowered himself to one knee. He did not grab her. He did not tell her everything was fine. He simply remained close enough for her to know she was not alone. Something about his calmness changed her breathing. Maisie lifted her face toward him. Then, to everyone's astonishment, she walked directly into his arms. Celeste stared as if the world had stopped. Her daughter had never done that. Everett looked equally shocked. For a brief second, something painful crossed his face, as though the child's trust had opened a door inside him that he had spent years keeping locked. He gently placed one hand on Maisie's shoulder and waited until she was steady. Celeste hurried toward them, but before she could say anything, Maisie tightened her arms around Everett and refused to let go. Celeste had no idea that Everett recognized something in her daughter that others had missed. Fear did not always need reassurance. Sometimes it needed someone who understood what it meant to be trapped inside a body that remembered danger. Everett had learned that lesson years earlier. Before becoming a maintenance worker and single father, he had served as a Navy SEAL. His military career had been extraordinary, but he never spoke about it. After leaving the service, he had returned home carrying memories he could not explain to anyone. A mission overseas had gone terribly wrong, and although Everett had survived, one of his closest teammates had not. Everett had spent years believing that he should have done more. Eventually, he had left the military, found ordinary work, and devoted himself to raising his young son, Graham. Graham was the reason Everett had learned to smile again. He was 12, curious, thoughtful, and constantly asking questions about the world. Everett never told him stories about combat. Instead, he taught him how to fix bicycles, plant vegetables, cook breakfast, and treat people with dignity. He wanted his son to inherit none of the bitterness he had carried home. Celeste soon learned that Everett was Graham's father when the boy arrived to help his father collect the tools left near the service entrance. She also learned that Everett had been working temporary maintenance jobs while raising Graham alone. At first, Celeste was suspicious. She was accustomed to people approaching her because of her money. She assumed Everett's kindness toward Maisie might be another way of gaining her attention. But then something happened that changed her opinion. The following week, Celeste invited Everett back to the estate to repair a damaged garden railing. Maisie was sitting nearby with her guide dog when Everett arrived. Without being asked, he described exactly where he was walking so she could understand his location. He never spoke to her as though she were helpless. He simply treated her like a child who deserved information. Maisie began asking him questions. What did the garden look like? How tall were the trees? What color were the flowers? What did the clouds look like? Everett answered every question patiently. When she asked what the ocean looked like, he paused. He told her it looked endless, like the sky had fallen onto the earth. Maisie smiled. Celeste watched from the doorway, feeling something inside her loosen. For the first time in years, Maisie was not asking her mother to describe the world. She was asking someone else. But the friendship created another problem. Celeste's private investigator discovered Everett's military history. The report was troubling. Everett had served in elite special operations, participated in classified missions, received commendations, and left the service under circumstances that were described only as personal hardship. Celeste confronted him. She feared anyone with such a past could be dangerous around her daughter. Everett did not defend himself aggressively. He simply admitted that he had served and explained that he had never told Celeste because he wanted to be judged for who he was now, not for what he had been. Celeste demanded to know why he had become a maintenance worker. Everett finally revealed the truth. He had been injured during his final deployment. Physically, he recovered. Emotionally, he did not. After losing a teammate, he began believing that every person he cared about would eventually disappear. When Graham's mother left their lives, Everett became convinced that the only way to protect his son was to create a quiet life where nobody could get close enough to hurt them. But Maisie had somehow broken through that wall. Celeste still struggled to trust him. Then came the accident. During a daytime charity event several weeks later, Maisie was walking with her cane along a paved garden path when a delivery vehicle unexpectedly rolled backward after its driver failed to secure the parking brake. People screamed and scattered. Maisie could not see what was happening. Everett could. He moved instantly. His old instincts returned with frightening precision. He crossed the distance in seconds, reached Maisie, pulled her safely away from the vehicle, and shielded her with his own body as the vehicle struck a stone planter and stopped. The garden went silent. Maisie was trembling. Everett was bleeding from a cut on his forehead, but his first concern was her. Celeste ran toward them. For a moment she saw not the billionaire mother, not the CEO, not the woman who controlled an empire, but simply a terrified mother holding her child. She hugged Maisie tightly. Then Maisie reached for Everett. Celeste watched her daughter extend one hand toward the injured man. And this time, Celeste did not pull her away. Instead, she placed Maisie's hand into Everett's. Something changed between them. Celeste finally understood that protecting Maisie from every danger was not the same as teaching her to live despite danger. Everett understood something too. He had spent years believing that survival meant keeping people at a safe distance. Maisie had shown him that trust could be an act of courage. The most unexpected change came from Graham. He had always been proud of his father, but he had never understood why Everett avoided talking about his military years. One afternoon, while repairing a small wooden bench with his father, Graham asked whether Everett was afraid of anything. Everett admitted that he was afraid of losing people. Graham quietly told him that being afraid of losing someone did not mean you should refuse to love them. Those words stayed with Everett. Celeste heard them later and realized that everyone in the family had been learning the same lesson from different directions. Maisie needed to discover that blindness did not mean helplessness. Everett needed to discover that surviving the past did not mean living inside it forever. Celeste needed to understand that love could become suffocating when fear disguised itself as protection. And Graham needed a father who could finally stop blaming himself for everything he could not control. Months passed. Everett accepted a permanent position managing security and maintenance at one of Celeste's community centers, but his relationship with the family became much more personal than an employment arrangement. Celeste gradually learned to trust him. She stopped treating his military past as a warning sign and started seeing it as one chapter in a complicated life. Maisie grew more confident. She began walking independently through familiar places, learned new mobility techniques, and eventually joined a children's adaptive sports program. Everett attended her first competition with Graham beside him. Maisie did not win that day. She came in last. But when she crossed the finish line, she was smiling. Celeste cried. Everett applauded. Graham shouted louder than everyone else. Maisie raised her face toward the sound and laughed. That afternoon, Celeste realized her daughter had not become fearless. She had become brave. There was a difference. Fearless people did not always understand danger. Brave people understood danger and moved forward anyway. Years later, Celeste would still remember the moment her blind daughter had run toward a stranger in the garden. She had initially thought it was the strangest thing she had ever witnessed. Eventually, she understood that Maisie had not been running toward a stranger. She had been running toward safety. Not because Everett was rich, powerful, or famous. Not because he was a former Navy SEAL. She ran toward him because he had treated her fear with patience instead of pity. And perhaps that was the greatest lesson of all. Sometimes the person who changes our lives is not the person who gives us everything. Sometimes it is the person who simply stays when everyone else expects us to fall apart. Everett had spent years believing that his greatest strength was his ability to survive. Maisie taught him that his greatest strength was his ability to care. Celeste had spent years believing that love meant preventing every possible wound. Maisie taught her that love also meant allowing someone to discover their own strength. And Maisie, the little girl who once feared unfamiliar footsteps, eventually learned that the world could be frightening without being hopeless. One warm afternoon, she walked through the same garden where everything had begun. Her cane tapped gently against the stone path. She stopped beside the fountain and listened to the water. Everett stood several steps away. Celeste watched from a nearby bench. Graham was helping arrange flowers for another children's charity event. Maisie smiled and said that she remembered the garden even though she had never seen it. Celeste asked how. Maisie explained that she remembered it through sounds, smells, footsteps, and the feeling of someone's hand helping her stand. She said she remembered the day because it was the day she learned that sometimes you could trust someone before you knew their name. Celeste looked at Everett. He smiled. Neither of them needed to say anything. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, leave a meaningful comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another emotional journey. And before you go, leave a meaningful comment telling us this: what do you believe is stronger, protecting someone from every hardship, or teaching them that they can face hardship and still keep moving forward? Because sometimes the greatest gift we can give another person is not a life without fear. It is the courage to walk through that fear knowing they are not alone. And sometimes, the person who saves us is not the one who rescues us from danger. Sometimes, they are simply the one who stays long enough to remind us that there is still a reason to believe in tomorrow.